morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday morning. Good morning, Brianna.
Good morning, Robby.
Good morning to viewers. Good morning, everybody. Let's get right to it. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, well, things got kind of testy for Nancy Pelosi yesterday when she was confronted outside of her home by protesters demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. Let's get right into it.
Most of your constituents want beside you. Stop the genocide. Stop the Holocaust.
Democrats want the ceasefire. The Democrats want the ceasefire.
Now, in case you didn't catch that, she said, go back to China where your headquarters is. That's just a day after accusing pro-ceasefire protesters of being Putin's puppets. Now, Pelosi isn't the only Hill Democrat in hot water over the mounting humanitarian crisis in Gaza. This weekend, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pleased neither left nor right when she was asked whether President Biden is supporting a genocide in the Middle East.
Do you agree with that word, genocide, that the president's been supporting a genocide, or does that go too far?
I think what we are seeing right now throughout the country is that young people are appalled at the violence and the indiscriminate loss of life. We are not just seeing 25,000 people that have died in Gaza. We are seeing the starvation of millions of people, the displacement of over 2 million Gazans. We have South Africa that has mounted a court in the ICJ. The ICJ ruled this week that Israel has a grave responsibility to prevent genocide.
But they're still determining whether it's a genocide. Do you think that
they are
term
still
is responsible,
determining
given
it?
that it's still under investigation?
I believe that they're still determining it, but in the interim ruling, the fact that they said there's a responsibility to prevent it, the fact that this word is even in play.
Meanwhile, dozens of U.S. government employees are set to fast in protest of President Biden's support of Israel this coming Thursday. Now, this comes as a new report in the Washington Post finds that members of Gen Z are expressing their frustrations over the war in Gaza on TikTok and getting the White House's attention. The Post describes left-leaning TikTok activists as an influential political force as the president seeks to win back the approval of younger voters. A new Pew Research survey finds among ages 18 to 29, just 27% approve of President Biden's job performance and 71% in that category disapprove.
Yes, those are terrible numbers, especially for young voters who tend to overwhelmingly support Democratic politicians. But that's just the tip of the iceberg here. I think that sometimes when stories are read through the lens of young voters are upset, they're easy to dismiss because young voters don't vote at high rates as older voters do. And there's a kind of trivialization of what's going on here in some groups where they say, well, it's just on TikTok, it's just young voters. Right. But I think there's some evidence that the TikTok stuff really does bother folks, as evidenced by the bipartisan interest in, frankly, banning TikTok that we see in Congress. And two,
although that was going on well before.
Well, yes, but it's because they're online that the TikTok audience tends to be much more critical of the establishment policies in a number of different contexts, including being at times critical of investments in the war in Ukraine. And yes, very, very critical of the siege of Gaza. But additionally, it's not just young people. Over 1,000 black pastors representing thousands and thousands of constituents met with the White House advocating for a ceasefire. The Huffington Post reported that Michigan's top Arab elected leader has never been reached out to by the White House, Representative Abraham Ayash, and he articulated growing frustrations within the Arab and Muslim American communities, particularly in important swing states. And it is increasingly odd, I would say, that you're not getting clearer messaging from the Biden administration and surrogates like AOC, who ultimately performed the role in an election year when they've endorsed Joe Biden as a surrogate of his campaign, as to what to do about that. You see her giving a lot of, I see you, I hear you, I understand, I also agree that Gaza is a humanitarian crisis language. But what does that mean if you're still in lockstep from an electoral and policy perspective with the man who is enabling that course of action?
Yeah, and it's not like Joe Biden is some kind of shoe-in for re-election where this doesn't really matter. I mean, he's underwater. His poll numbers are terrible nationally and in swing states. Perhaps he's governing a coalition that is just ungovernable, but whatever the reason is, becoming even more unpopular with key demographic support groups, including young people and minorities, is going to sink any chance he has. I think with the young people, you're right that they vote in less compelling percentage numbers, but clearly having young people on your side in terms of door-to-door campaigning, less so now, but in terms of messaging on social media, in terms of carrying the torch, that kind of thing, I think they do much more legwork than other groups. That was obviously very important to Barack Obama's successful primary and election way back when. So I do think it's certainly going to hurt him that it's shaping up this way.
Yeah, and she's not exactly in this age group. I'm going to talk about Taylor Swift. You know, she's a little older than the kind of young people age group that we're describing here. But we covevered yesterday how
she was invented in a lab in order to help get Joe Biden reelected. That's the
right. And people are really anxious about whether or not she's going to give Biden the endorsement, in part because her endorsement back in 2020 was meaningful. Apparently, her post on Instagram to her 272 million followers back in 2020 led directly to 35,000 voter registrations. So there's a lot of power here. So I do think that the kind of conservative anxiety about, this is a plot, this is a scam. I mean, she obviously did it on her own accord, 4 years ago, so that is what it is. But I think there's an interesting question on the other side for the Biden administration, which is she going to be willing to stick her neck out again when Biden is so deeply unpopular, and while he is seen as the enabler of one of the worst humanitarian crises we've seen in modern history?
If I was her, I would want nothing to do with politics anyway. I would just stay out. I don't know why. And truly, maybe this is coming from an old person. I know this is correct. It just blows my mind. It baffles me that people care what Taylor Swift thinks about politics, or people will vote for who Taylor Swift wants them to vote for, or get registered because she tells them to. I know that's the case. I just can't identify it or imagine it. I think and it's not specific to Taylor Swift, just celebrities in general.
I think it's
I don't care what they think about anything.
I think it's often the case that, especially when we're talking about advocacy for issues that are not broadly accepted socially, and the issue of Palestinian...
Joe Biden?
The issue of Palestinian rights is one of those issues that does not get mainstream acceptance in liberal media and the liberal press. It's been a third rail issue for so long that I do think it is incredibly powerful for people on TikTok who are basically anonymous or very high profile people to demonstrate that they're willing to publicly support the interests of Palestinians and call for a ceasefire. I do think it empowers folks who've been told for years that this issue is too complicated, don't weigh in, you might be called anti-Semitic if you have the wrong opinion. And having a really high-profile validator whose ethics and values you respect for other reasons, I think is actually enormously powerful. And part of why Joe Biden maybe should be concerned, not just about Taylor Swift and what she may or may not do, but about the overwhelming direction of the commentary on TikTok.
It's just a right-left. Maybe it's just a right-left difference. It always calls to mind those kinds of celebrity PSAs where they all say the same phrase over and over again. The right-left difference? The
right that just decided they're going to stop drinking Budweiser because they hired one influencer to hold a can of beer one time?
Because they don't want to be lectured to by celebrities who have nothing to do with and no knowledge of the product. It's consistent with that.
Okay.
More Rising right after this.